Welcome to Dexerto's Curveball Preview Show, presented by DJ Esports, the world's premier all-crypto esports betting site providing real-time odds. I am not James Banks. For once, he won't be here today, so I'm going to be hosting instead. My name is Mitch, and I'm not alone, thankfully. I'm joined by fRoD as usual, and a very special guest today. We've brought on NBK to the show. Let's start with yourself, NBK. How you feeling, and welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Very, very good. I'm excited to be talking about this. Haven't had the chance to talk much about Valorant and all the competition around it, so this should be a fun one.
Absolutely, and fRoD, breaking down the LCQs today, the Last Chance Qualifiers. How excited are you for these competitions to kick off?
Yeah, very excited. I mean, these are lands too, you know, at least here in NA. This is almost going to feel like a mini like Berlin almost for us. Like we get to see all these teams on land, so I'm super excited for that. And I'm also excited to see what NBK has to think about Valorant and the game and everything like that. So just really, you know, excited to get this on the road.
Today's a good day, and like you said, it's like a mini Berlin for you guys over there, actually getting to play on LAN. And the upside is this time an NA team will actually win. We're going to jump in first, though, to EMEA. We're going to talk about the premier region, #1 in the world, last time I checked at least. And we're going to start by kicking it off with a little bit of conversation around G2. Now, obviously, G2 weren't in a great spot after falling off a little bit. They were a team that dominated the scene for so long and then fell off, rebuilt the roster, and now I think they look better than ever. I mean, I'd be curious to get your stand on that, NBK, and do you think that this is actually going to be a team that can make it out of LCQ?
I mean, they definitely can, because I don't think you have all the best teams in the world, and so they are definitely fighting for just going through in this tournament. Now, are they at the best version possible and going to win champions and all that kind of stuff? I doubt it much more. Okay. But yeah, like, for this tournament, I think because they changed things after losing in Berlin, I think they will have had the chance to change some parts of the games while still having their bases, and those extra things added to the team play they already have will just bring probably something new to the table for them. And I think that's the main part as to why they have a good chance in this tournament. Like, they have tested a lot of things on LAN, and they're able to come back now and to improve on those things, and know where the strength and weaknesses lies. So I think it's a pretty good thing for them to have lost and to be able to get a second chance here.
Yeah, I think one of the craziest things for me about G2 and the rebuild of this roster was obviously they acquired some all-star players like your Nukier, your Avova. These guys have been statistical anomalies when it comes to EMEA Valorant and then going on to global. But the question mark for me was always around keloqz and whether this guy would show up when it comes to a LAN environment. And sure, there wasn't a crowd, so it's a little bit easier. But fRoD, I mean, this dude did show up. He looked pretty damn good.
Yeah, and what I like about G2 is exactly what NBK said, is like they continue to get stronger, and I think that they're a team that they clearly learn from their losses, and this is a team that, you know, they can make like drastic changes, and they've done it within their style of play. They've allowed keloqz to expand a little bit more, get a little bit more loose, and in my opinion, that's kind of what you need right now out of your Jet and your Opera to kind of be that X factor in certain moments. And you know, when you're like maybe restricting that player in certain strategies, I think that it can hinder the team in the long run. So I like what G2 is doing as far as like evolving, learning from their mistakes, and allowing the players to kind of just do their thing, because kind of, as you mentioned, they have such good players, guys that won early on in Valorant as well. You don't want to put some of these guys in boxes in some way. You want to maybe find like the proper style of play, expand on it, learn from it, figure out what works as well, and then just continue to try and perfect on that.
Now, I wonder, just being as he is your countryman, NBK, do you have much contact on keloqz? Have you heard whispers around? What's your impression of this guy?
So I don't really know him personally. I know him and Kenny have played together outside of practice and stuff like that, obviously. But I mean, I've been quite impressed, yeah. And I think fRoD is on point by saying that you can't really put those players in boxes because they just have that wild aspect to them and how they play. And I think in Valorant, especially at this stage, we're still in a place where everything is evolving a lot, and a player can really be a difference maker more than in the future, when the game is going to be a bit more established and everyone is going to be more comfortable about some aspects of the game in terms of controlling the map and utility. And yeah, for Kellogg's, I've been quite impressed. I didn't really expect anything from him, to be honest, coming into the tournament, because I didn't know much first LAN. But I mean, he was owning it. I think he was owning the place, like during the games. Whenever he got like even 3 kills and like anti-ecos, he was just jumping off his chair. And I think it brings a lot to a team to have a player like that. That seems, you know, very positive and giving a lot of energy while still playing very good. I think that's an underrated factor, especially on LAN, to have someone that shares the energy that he has and empowers the whole team. And like, it's more of a passive thing that people don't really point out, but I think that's a very valuable thing to have in your team.
Yeah, it's sort of like that Boaster effect that we talked about, you know, just having him and his energy out there. Like, you can't really quantify that, but that's what you need out there. And, you know, maybe the spectators or outsiders don't really understand that, but everyone that's within the team, they really get to feed off of that energy, and it becomes like, you know, a lifeblood of that team. And I also think that in some cases, guys like Mixwell are doing a really good job of kind of accepting and honing in that veteran and more experienced role, because the thing with Mixwell is he's played the game from the very beginning, probably even like alphas and stuff like that. So he's someone that knows all the agents, is playing the game all the time. If anything, I think that he's been doing a better job of like letting other players carry the load there, and he just kind of fills in, does what's necessary, and kind of embodies that sort of veteran experienced leader in the team mindset. And I think that once you can combine the two with his like mentality and in the game style, I think it's wonderful, because it's allowing Kellogg's to do some of the things that, you know, maybe he wouldn't do when he was playing Jet and whatnot.
You know, these guys are going to be facing off against a team that I don't think a lot of people will be familiar with. Maybe those with a finger on the pulse of like the collegiate scene might, if you've been looking at a lot of the MENA games. But I think for the most part, Anubis are not going to be known by the audience. But I'm curious about if you guys have any impressions on if they'll actually stand a chance of taking G2 down, because at Masters, as we've just went over, G2 looked almost untouchable. They were the team that beat Sentinels first, and now Anubis have to come up against them in the first round of LCQ. The good thing is they're playing from Turkey, so ping isn't as much a factor as it would have been if they were in Egypt, but still, I feel like ping's the least of the issues.
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting with Valorant. I think they stand a chance for sure, because in terms of game style, everything is open in this game, and it's something that will be the case for probably the next year still, and especially with new agents coming out, because you can always bring a lot of tricky things in a game and like really surprise opponents and like win some crucial rounds that will then, you know, make you snowball and have more ultimates, and then, you know, you can capitalize on all of that. So they have a chance. I think what's really gonna be the difference maker is probably going to be individual skill and individual talent, just in terms of decision making and just raw skill. That's where they will probably fall short to G2. But I mean, I don't know. I didn't see them too much. I can't say that for sure.
Of course.
But there's definitely a chance. But it's still going to remain pretty low, because for G2, it's going to be a game for them to focus on really hard in order to start the tournament on the right foot, because if they struggle against them, it's not going to give them confidence to go further in the tournament. And starting off with a solid win, I think, would be pretty important for them.
No, and I think that it's like a very important thing what you said too. Like, the styles of play are very like strong in specific regions, and you know, if they have any sort of resemblance to how Supermassive Blaze plays, for example, I think that they stand a very good chance, because when you look at SMB, they have like that methodical play, teamwork based. They don't really rely too much on the individual prowess of like someone. They just let that kind of develop itself out, I guess. So I mean, if they have that sort of style, I mean, and their teamwork is on, they're hitting some shots, like they could definitely take that game. It's just more of, you know, G2 has shown that they can beat anybody in the best teams in the world. It's just, I'm kind of more interested in seeing like what version of G2 we get in that game, because like if they come out firing, if they're playing hot, like they're going to wipe the floor with whoever they play. But, you know, if they start off slow, MR12, it could snowball very, very fast in this game. You know, some new maps getting in the mix too. You know, like I'm not even sure if G2 has played like Breeze, for example. So, you know, obviously I don't think Fracture's being played yet, but it's going to start being played at some point. So as we've talked about, like players have to develop their styles and their agent pool. I mean, teams have to develop their map pools and their strategic pools. So that's the other element that we have to look into too, where styles of play can potentially shift depending, you know, how people develop these new maps and strategies on these new maps.
One thing I'll say for Anubis that at least I'm a big fan of is ShahZaM. Like, this guy was unbelievable when we looked at him playing regionally, at least collegiately. But now when you look at him on Vitality, at a very short stint just standing in for them, and he was taking roles that he doesn't normally play. He was completely shifting up his playstyle. And as a star in his region, I think he's probably the best player in Egypt. He came over to Europe playing on an insane ping, first of all, and then was selfless enough to say, hey, look, I'll play whatever we need. Sky, Sage, yeah, I don't need to play Jet. I don't need to play Raze. Even though he would have brought so much value there, obviously there were players that wanted that instead. No, we won't talk about how that was assigned because that was completely mismanaged on the agent selection. But anyways, Vitality were out to trip themselves up in the process, kind of making ShahZaM look a little bit less than I think what he will coming into this tournament. But 100% agree with you guys that the bottom line is they shouldn't be beating G2. G2 are possibly the favorites for this entire bracket. At least it's what a lot of people will talk about them as. We'll get on to predictions a little bit later on and discuss that in depth. But, you know, it's not an easy opening game. That's for sure. Looking further down the bracket, though, right down to the bottom, we've got Liquid. Now, Liquid are going to have quite a bit of pressure on them. At least the opening game is versus OBG, so it's not the most difficult. But they've undergone quite a number of changes since we've seen them last, gameplay-wise, but also a few roster changes in there as well. That's interesting to see brothers playing on the same team.
Yeah, I think there are very few teams. There's one I can think of in Counter-Strike, the Brazilians that were playing together for quite some time.
Freddy Frog also had
oh
a brother,
yeah, and them, yeah, true. Yeah, no, that's correct.
Twins,
so,
in fact.
Yeah, so it's very rare, but it's very fun to see, and especially when you know like the talent that they both have, that can be very explosive, and yeah, that's going to be a very funny game to watch, and a very funny tournament to watch throughout, I think, for them.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see like what kind of agents he's going to be playing, what style of play it's going to be, because in this game, like when you add one player, make one roster change, like it does change the style of play of a team quite a bit. And I don't think Navarre is a kind of, I mean, he seemed like he kind of was, at least in Counter-Strike, that he could just fill in any kind of role. But I think in this game, it's not about filling in every role because you have to define certain roles. It's more about like honing in that and specializing in that. So if you're given a specific role in Valorant, you might have an agent pool of 3, 4, or 5 agents, depending on like how you want to play in some way. I mean, he's got to be able to dominate those specific agents in the style of play they want to play. So I'm kind of curious to see how that goes because, I mean, for all we know, we might get a whole new Liquid as far as what they look out there just based on his style of play. But at the end of the day, we don't know, but I'm actually very curious to see, and I think that this is kind of what Liquid needed in some way to like inject a little bit of life in them, and hopefully this kind of firepower allows that to shine a little bit more there.
I'm very curious, actually, NBK, on your perspective on this, because fRoD just mentioned, you know, we could see a different Liquid, and that kind of makes me wonder. We know Scream and we know Navarre. They're both very capable individual players. How do you think the dynamic of a team, like, does it put more pressure on them, let's say, playing on a team with their brother? Like, it's got to really change the team dynamic, right?
Well, I think for Liquid, the prime lies a bit elsewhere. And that's where I have an issue with them, because if you look at their roster, I think they're all very capable, talented individual, but I think when you put them together, I think there is something missing. Like, you don't, like, what is the direction? I mean, where is the direction coming from this team? Like, who is going to be the person that is going to like really like put the 5 players together and not play, you know, more as a mix, but like play with like a real direction and how to do things and tempo and calling the right way. Like, who is smoking, for example, in his team? Who is playing controller? Like, you already have like those roles are like going to be very hard. And I agree with fRoD. You need to have players that are going to be role in certain roles, and like have 1 or 2 players that are going to be a bit more flexible in terms of game style and how they can adapt from one map to another, and with different agents. But now you already have 2 players that are main uppers in a team, which are Jamppi and Navarre. You have Soulcast and Scream that are playmakers. Link that is going to be more lurking and playing more Sentinel. There is something that is a bit weird in all of that, right? So
no, and I have something to say too, because I feel like we've discussed this before, and MBK, you can kind of give me your opinion on this, but we've kind of come to some sort of conclusion in some way that, like, maybe Liquid's problems are not even like the players there, in the sense it's more of like how they're being utilized in some way. It's like you can't, like we talked about earlier, you can't put Scream in a box at all, but strategically, agent pool wise, he's always in a box. So it's like you can't really do much when all the players individually. It's almost like there is a more importance or a stressing point on strategy and agent over gunplay or something like that, which I think that kind of is what gets lost in Valorant sometimes. You know, like us coming from Counter-Strike, like we understand and appreciate like pure gunplay, and you know, obviously in Valorant these abilities can be disruptive, but we always rely back on gunplay and just the premise of that. And I think that this is where there might be like an overimportance on the strategic side and not understanding the personnel you have. And the personnel you have, like, you can't put all these guys in these kinds of boxes, because if you are and you're putting Scream constantly on Sage or different agents, or kind of telling him, it's like, I mean, if you let's see every other team and the success they're having, they're letting guys like Scream just go all out, and it's like you're not utilizing what you have there.
It seems like a big risk as well, bringing in Navera. I think one of the things, so we better caveat this with, this is not a strict pickup by Liquid. This is a situation where we've had Cryptic step back for personal issues, so they need another player. But to go to a player who hasn't played the game before, I mean, look, that's a Team Liquid move at this point, right? Picking up Jamppi, putting him in. But are we going to see day one Jamppi vibes? Like, there were a lot of decision-making flaws there towards the first couple of weeks, obviously, because the dude was still learning the game. So for Navera, I don't know where he's at in terms of knowledge, but it seems like a very strange decision to put a player on a team with his brother for the first official in such an important game. They must have a lot of faith in him.
Yeah, I mean, he'd been playing for several months, so I'm not too worried about the fact that he's just coming out of nowhere and like just playing the game. So he's gonna be good regardless. But yeah, like when you come into official games, it's always gonna be different than practice or ranked games. So yeah, it's gonna be a question mark. But like, and especially the fact that he's playing pretty passive. As a player, he's always been fairly passive, and it's hard to be playing passive in Valorant, because if people execute on you with all the abilities that they have, you're just gonna get destroyed, because you can't just stop them like that. So so it's gonna be interesting, and you're gonna need to have persons that make space for him. So I expect Jamppi and Soulcast to be doing that in a team, to really be able to let Scream and Navera to shine a bit more, because they're more passive and ready to collect people when they come in their crosshair, and that's kind of what I'm expecting from them. But yeah, it will also depend on what game plans they have created and how loose they can play, because you can see when they start playing more wild, like in more default, and like taking duels and all of that, and really playing those 3-on-3s, that's when they start getting a bit better. But if they can't get those entries, they can't get those trades, that's where you need to have that sort of direction to be able to shift the halves around, to be able to regain control of the game. And that's where I don't know if they have that. And that's my concern with Liquid. And so if they can just start with full confidence and then run with it the whole tournament, they can be impressive for sure, because they have crazy talent. And the question mark is, will they be able to do that? And that's, again, my concern with them, and on top of what roles they're all going to play.
Now, we talked earlier about players that you can't kind of contain in a box, that some players have a wild nature to them, and I think it would be best to talk about Yassine real quick then, because the opening matchup between Supermassive Blaze and Guild is, at least for me, the highlight of the bracket in the upper quarterfinals. Seeing these two teams, I mean, SMB is a quick profile. They looked fantastic, but they come into Masters, tough enough group, but they don't really manage to do a bunch, right? We expected more of them pushing further into the tournament, maybe being a team that could compete for the top, and I don't think they'll be thoroughly happy with how they performed. But in this bracket, can we see them as a dark horse to take it over G2? Or, hell, maybe an outright favorite?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that they are. I mean, it seems like SMB, like they perform better. I'm not gonna say they're online or anything like that, but in these online qualifiers, like things are a little bit different. You're more comfortable. You know, I think that they're also a team that they're very new. Like they weren't even around prior to. So it's like we'll see how they have taken the loss from Berlin. You know, it was kind of unfortunate. You know, like they played like day one, then they didn't play for like 4 or 5 days. It almost felt like where was SMB and not like where were they? It was more of like we want to see them play, and it almost felt like they were kind of cold in that event. And I want to see them kind of heat up because we all had them like going very high. We all like thought that they were gonna do very, very well in this tournament. So I'm actually curious. You know, like they're a team that like no roster changes. Like they're gonna take that loss in the chin and they're gonna move on and they're gonna look forward to champions. So I mean, I think that this is gonna be a tone setter. Like if they wipe the floor with Guild, which is a very good team that in my opinion deserves to be potentially at some of these major events, I mean, they'll just carry that on to Liquid. And then if they can win those 2 games, they'll be already guaranteed, you know, a chance to compete at Champions for that final spot. I mean, I could definitely see it happening. And I think that this game, whoever wins that game and faces Liquid is going to kind of, you know, dictate the pace because they're all going to have to go against G2 at some point.
Yeah, most definitely. And there are 2 things that are very... So one thing just about Supermassive Blaze at the LAN event, as far as I know, it was probably the first big lag event, or if not one of the first. So like that lack of experience just shows up when you just come in, like especially against players that have that experience already. And you can see a lot of the teams that went far in the tournaments had experienced players with them to be able to contain that and like perform well. So that's the one thing for the past. But now for this matchup, what's very, very interesting, I feel like, is just the play style of both teams. You have Guild that is playing super wild, that is going to be very aggro, going around individualist, taking duels and stuff like that. And SMB that is very controlled and that can control the pace very well between being aggressive and passive. And so yeah, I think it's going to be very, very interesting. But like if SMB controls the pace, I think they have a good edge because they have the teamwork. They didn't change players. You can see that they're really trying to control the game a bit like what Gambit is doing. And if they can start controlling that and get Guild frustrated in a game by like denying all the entries and starting to get control early in the halves, I think they can actually take it fairly easily. But you have to contain Guild in order to not let them lose and go crazy, because once you open that box, Guild will be all over the place and they will be dominating the game. So I can see that game going really, like, being almost one-sided on every map for either team, because the game side, I think, are prone to make that happen.
Now, we've talked about the EMEA bracket. The only game we've left out now is Footballist and Oxygen, the regional mashup of Turkish teams, and Footballist making it through on the brunt of their points from the stage 1, I think. And when you look at that matchup, I think it's pretty clear cut. We've seen it regionally that Oxygen are favorites to take it over Footballist, move on. That whole upper part of the bracket really feels G2 favored. Like they can just walk into the grand final, or the upper final at least, and take on, you know, Supermassive, Guild, Liquid, one of those guys that makes it through. But I'm curious to see who you guys think is going to make it all the way. Let's jump into predictions now. This is for who is going to take the #1 spot, the grand final. Let's start with you, fRoD. Who are you thinking?
I got G2. I mean, I think that they're going to just run with it. I mean, if they end up falling short, it might end up being to say it at Liquid. I think if Liquid has some sort of insane run, that may have been where I was initially kind of leaning, but I think I got to go with G2 because they're a team that, like, they've consistently gotten better and better. So this is a double elimination tournament as well. So even if they do fumble and lose in one way, they have the opportunity to make it and still qualify. So I think this is another one of those opportunities that if they continue on that trend of going upwards, I got G2 on this.
I'm going to see that. NBK, where are you at?
I mean, it's gonna be boring, but I have to go the same way. I mean, G2 are just doing good, but I'd put SMB as a dark horse, very close to them.
Yeah.
I expect them to be, both of them, fighting in the final, because, yeah, they look like the 2 teams that are the most, how can I say that? Like, they're controlling the game. They're really trying to create something that is complete in a game, and so yeah, I expect those 2 to be in the final and G2 to take it.
I can see that. You know, my prediction is exactly the same. So I'll mix it up then. I was going to go G2, but just to keep things interesting, I'm going to make the argument that I think Guild's going to take it. They've been 2 months off cam. They haven't really been, showing anything. Haven't made roster changes, which at one point they were looking into for personal reasons or otherwise. These players are fully committed to the team now. They're looking at that trophy, wanting to make it to champions. And if you listen to the interviews we had with these guys when they finished, when they didn't manage to make it even to Iceland, they were heartbroken. Berlin, it has been such a terrible year for Guild because they always make it so close and then fail to hit the mark. But they have been theory crafting and grinding for 2 months now, and I got to say, I believe they have the drive. The only question is, can they deliver on it? So I'll say Guild as a surprise, just to come out of nowhere and surprise us all and really put themselves back on the map of EMEA. Now, before we continue, a quick reminder that Curveball is brought to you by DJ Esports. You can earn up to 800,000 USDT in the free-to-enter DJ Esports Worlds Prediction Series. Sign up with the link in the description and get 400 DJT free. Limited time only. Terms and conditions apply. Now, gents, let's move on to talking about the second, maybe third best region. Let's talk about North America. Now, fRoD, you know all about these guys. Obviously, the North American teams struggle to win in general. We saw it at Berlin. They weren't able to take the trophy, and really, it's just been such a catastrophe. So, obviously, for the North American qualifiers, they decided that they would eliminate Oceania completely just to be sure that a North American team can win something for the rest of the year.
Ace, we gotta do what we gotta do. No, I mean, on a serious note on that part, I mean, I feel really bad because the Oceania teams, they have a lot of good players. They really deserve to be out there. But, I think in this kind of way, it was kind of a saving grace for Riot because at the end of the day, these first 2 rounds were going to be single elimination. It was going to be a 10-team bracket format, which is already kind of odd. So I think this was some sort of like saving grace for them as far as to just wipe the whole entire tournament structure, redo it, and have something more proper. I mean, this is going to be on LAN, so this is like very hyped up for a lot of players. I mean, pretty much every team has been out there, I guess, like boot camping in Los Angeles already, getting prepared for this. So I mean, this is like kind of our big event for at least NA.
You know what blows my mind? What really blows my mind about that? You had Chiefs sat there in the first game, right? They were going to fly over 16 hours of travel to play 1 game and then potentially go home. A BO3, something goes wrong. They surprise pick an agent. They get a random showstopper lookie kill, win the 3rd map. It could be so tight. If you run a series again, they might make it through. 16 hours of travel. I mean, guys, you were both competitors. How would you feel traveling halfway across the globe just to lose a single BO3? That's absolutely crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think overall the formats of what Riot has been seeing so far, I'm not a big fan of, especially for like all the big tournaments. I think it can do really much more, especially when you look at the bigger tournaments and like other esports. I think there is a chance to do much more. But yeah, talking about this, it was just crazy to see that the whole region is wiped out just like that. Like, and even then, if it was happening, just playing 1 game potentially and then leaving. I mean, as a competitor, you gotta do what you gotta do. So you're gonna take that trip. You're gonna prepare as much as possible to win that 1 game because you know that this is what you have to do and you want to go further, so you do it. But it's still crazy. Like it's ridiculous to offer that to a region that has several teams that can be interesting to watch, like players that can grow and that can do good things. So either you add them to like another region or something like this, but like don't just deny them a chance to prove themselves into play. I think that's just mind-blowing to see.
I mean, fRoD, I'm not sure how you feel about this, but I would almost go on record saying that I reckon Oceania deserves this spot more than most of LATAM does. Like, I think Oceania teams would roll that region if they moved over. And that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. And in fact, it's almost alarming that they don't have maybe a sort of qualification for themselves. Like Oceania should at least get something where maybe they get 1 spot in every major, at least for the most part.
Or in with SEA, right?
Exactly, as they are in
games.
Counter-Strike and other games. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, the fact that they're involved in NA is a little bit different story. I mean, in CS, it's only like that because the organization is based here or the players move here, for example. It's not just like, because I think a big root of the problem too is the whole COVID restrictions and certain quarantine things, which we didn't have to deal with as pros, but that adds a different layer because, yeah, I've done those trips and I'm sure NBK has too, where you've flown across the world, got first rounded and you're kind of mad, but then add some sort of quarantine into that process where you can't even do anything, enjoy the area you're at, or like you're basically confined into some sort of area, can't even be with your teammates. It's almost like you can't be at home in the comfort of your home, and you can't even be like with your teammates either in some sort of way because you're quarantined, and then you get first rounded. It just like, I mean, it's maybe a blessing in disguise that some of these guys don't have to go through this, but as competitors, I'm sure they don't mind having to potentially risk going through some of this crap just to be able to compete. But at the end of the day, it's not the ideal situation at all. And I think it's this whole thing is doing a big disservice to that whole entire region that deserves some sort of care. Whereas, you know, maybe like you mentioned, some other regions are getting maybe too many second chances in some way, or too much love in some sort of cases. When, you know, what's wrong with them getting that?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Obviously, the explanations on why it happened have been kind of vague, that there's been complications, but I've heard a lot of stuff that like teams were getting their flights booked last week. And it's like, well, if you're booking them a week before they need to go, there's ESTAs. Like we were talking to some of the Oceania players. We heard it from like Alphish Guy, and some of the guys were interviewing a few of the players, and they were saying that even just to leave Australia right now, you have to have an exceptional reason. The government has to approve your vacation, your work, whatever.
And I'm sure that they can. I mean, this is Riot, and
there's
they're
a
having
team in
land.
Iceland or in Berlin right now competing in Worlds that's from Australia. So Riot themselves have already organized in very recent memory a team to leave Australia to go to a different country, but for some reason it didn't happen this time. And there's a bunch of excuses. It could be resources weren't there, the people that were allocated like were on vacation, and no one else picked it up, whatever. There's so many things that could have happened. I've heard so many whispers, but ultimately for me the issue is accountability. I haven't heard anyone apologize for it. I haven't heard anyone say, oh, we'll make sure it won't happen in the future. It's just like, hey, listen, we'll compensate the team somehow. You can't compensate them for that. No amount of money, unless we're talking in the millions. They're not going to sit back and go, hey, I'm happy I missed out on our chance and champions and our whole year was wasted.
Yeah, for sure. And like, and I think it's just even in general, I think when you look at, okay, the last Masters was a bit better, but if you want to organize tournaments with like regional qualifiers and all of that, you have to make the main tournament a bit bigger than for every team to have, or sorry, for every region to have some sort of representation. And then you're being able to play a bit more with that and to see which region has more influence, viewership, whatever. You can count on like so many things then, and like then you can justify everything. But if you don't even give a chance on the first hand to some big regions, yeah, you're gonna like it's a struggle. It's a problem in my opinion, because you can see it in League of Legends, you can see it in Counter-Strike, like in as the main esports I can think of, and Dota. I mean, you have so many good teams from so many regions, and denying them, I think, is an issue for the game and the esports side of it. And so I just hope that they're going to be able to expand a bit more, have bigger tournaments, and I really hope that this year and the year before are really like test years to really see in the future how they can organize the best tournaments possible, because they've been successful with League. I expect them to be successful with Valorant, and I just really hope that those are, you know, test years on how to make the tournaments and how to include everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's just tough, like neglecting a region in general like that. I mean, even when you, like you said, look at like Counter-Strike, for example. I mean, when you look at the Australian scene in Counter-Strike, like it's extremely vibrant. I mean, even when you go to tournaments over there, I mean, it's amazing. Like talking to players that live there and compete there, when they come over to tournaments, I mean, they live and breathe gaming and stuff like that. So this is almost one of those regions that it's like they have so much passion for gaming that they almost have to be included in this, and it's almost shocking that they're not. And hopefully there's a lot more awareness and stuff that could be brought, that this can change for next year potentially, because they really deserve that opportunity, and almost their own opportunity, not even being mixed in with other regions sometimes. Yeah,
I think like obviously the biggest sadness about this is that it was avoidable. You know, this was preventable. These teams could be there getting ready to play right now, and that's what really sucks about the whole situation. I'll say from my hands-on experience with Riot, they are constantly looking to push forward and improve year on year, formats, whatever. They're constantly looking for feedback, and this is definitely something they're aware of as a problem, but it's still needs to be highlighted for the community and for them to understand why we won't have any Oceania teams in Champions or in the LCQ at all, which really really sucks.
Yeah, but I think that also, and this is in some sort of way too, like I see Riot as being reactionary rather than being proactive in these cases. And I think that when it comes to the integrity of our game and the tournaments and the scenes and stuff like that, you need to be proactive. You need to be doing research, developing, constantly evolving what you do. If you're always on that reactionary pattern, you're basically just covering up mistakes or covering up errors, or you're doing certain things like this. And I think it's kind of in some way has shown that they need to establish that esports side a lot stricter. Like seeing just even Iceland and the formats that they've had consistent issues with some of these things, and obviously they've been consistent about fixing them and listening to community feedback, which again is amazing. But at the same time, that reactionary stuff is more of the after the fact. I think if they become more proactive in preventing some of these issues, I think it'll go a long way to kind of just smoothing out the whole process for everyone in general.
Yeah, I think a lot of these issues can honestly be solved by more money. Like more money dedicated to Valorant will give bigger tournaments. Like when we talked earlier about making Champions a bigger event, well, that's going to mean a lot more days, a lot more travel for teams, a lot more sub events which have prize pools and production and organization and admins and blah blah blah. And we go down the rabbit hole. All of a sudden, it's oh, add an extra 6 teams. Oh, well, now you're talking millions extra to organize everything for it. So I appreciate that aspect of it, but at the same time, there's a line, right, where of acceptable standards, and I think excluding a whole region is definitely below that line. Hopefully that's something we never have to see again. Moving on though to North America in general, let's start out by talking about 100 Thieves. These guys are looking a little bit different, and surprisingly so, because fRoD, I'd love to get your opinion on this. Like, I really thought they looked pretty good in Berlin, but I guess these guys are on a relentless pursuit of perfection.
Yeah, I mean, it's very tough. And I mean, 100 Thieves, like you said, they're on that relentless pursuit of perfection. I mean, just like a lot of teams, honestly, in the NA side, it just almost seems like it's either win or roster changes is inevitable. And I could almost promise you that after LCQ happens, there's 8 teams at LCQ. You're probably going to be about six or 7 teams see changes. And you're already seeing changes going on into LCQ, which is like a whole entire different storyline, which is kind of shocking to me just because of all this. But yeah, I mean, going back to what you're saying, like 100 Thieves is a team that has always been very impressive. Like they're that consistent staple. In fact, it was kind of sad that they weren't at Iceland, for example, because they're a team that we would love in the NA side to kind of showcase to the world, because they're that kind of group of that experience, those like veteran type players. And I think that you were able to see a big side of that in Berlin when they played Gambit, because when they were able to beat them in the group stage, they got wiped out in the first game and their backs were against the wall second map, and they were able to turn that game around and they win the third game. So I mean, it's one of these things that I think that their experience shines through, but this is one of those things that I'm just curious to see how this roster change works out, because they're changing out that veteran experience. I mean, this isn't Steel is a very good player, and it's not even that he's a good player like that. It's like the style of play that 100 Thieves had was very centered around his like ideology and strategies and whatnot, and not only changing a player for his role, but changing leadership and strategic side of it, I think is going to be a whole new side to 100 Thieves. I think that they believe that it's going to be the right way, but we have to kind of see where they go, because they're not going to be able to look how they were before slotting in Boy for Steel's position just simply off that, while adding other gunners and kind of expanding their role. It just almost seems like a different direction that they're going as a team, but one that we're kind of curious to see that could develop, because they have such amazing talent.
The thing that really surprised me about this situation, NBK, I'm not sure, I'd love to get your stance on this. You have the roster, right, with Steel on it. It comes top 4 at a global event, pretty damn good. Steel gets dropped, or at least benched afterwards. They add in Boy, cool. Okay, you want to make a sub like that, as fRoD just talked about all those changes they're making, fair enough. What really struck me as odd was bringing 7 in as a sub, someone that is largely untested, instead of Steel, who is still actively on the roster. He is still signed to 100 Thieves, and on Twitter he even said he will be competing in 2022, presumably under a different team, and there's negotiations and so on. But it seems very odd to me that you would prefer, if, God forbid, one of these players on the way to this event ends up with COVID and they need a sub to play, then surely, at least for me, you would prefer to have Steel, who already slots into the team. He knows the team very well. You've played with him. rather than a largely untested player who would then be playing with you for the first time with presumably only a couple weeks of prac. And even then as a sub, so maybe no prac. It's very weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to them making the replacement and having a player who's ready to replace that replacement in a way, I feel like. And also probably personal relationships in the team and deciding to have like a straight, clear direction under the roof of Nitro, I would assume. And having that one direction of just, letting those players a bit more loose. And yeah, nothing against Steel, but I like the roster change. I think they needed a little bit more craziness, like those more younger players that are just going to be wild on the server and, can take over a game, that are going to have more of that symbiosis with the game, with like their own eye and playing a lot of ranked and, doing their own moves and saying, fuck it, I'm just going in, I'm going to kill them all with everything I have. And so I like that part because I think they have a very strong basis of experience and how to play, with all the Counter-Strike values, like crossfires and how to take a bomb site and pace and all of that. But I think that was a bit too much, to be honest. I think they were missing a little bit of something. And you can see it, I think, even during their games, that Asuna sometimes is just bringing something that other players don't necessarily bring, and not necessarily just in terms of agents that he's playing. And so having a second player like that, I think, is going to be important for them because they have the players to be able to center and really focus those newer players that are going to come in and bring something to the table. And I guess they were disagreeing on some direction as well on how to play the game and their approaches. And yeah, I mean, I like the new look that they have. And I think that Steel is going to be a very valuable asset to any other team that is going to take him and give him, the reins of the roster.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the one thing too that is kind of lost in this roster change as well is that this might have been something that has been, a long time coming in some way within that squad, just because Boy has been someone that's been on the roster for a long time. It's not like he was recruited. Boy has been on this team as some sort of analyst / backup for quite some time now. Because 100 Thieves does have quite a big staff around their team. They have a coach, they have an analyst, they had Boy as another analyst, so they had 2 analysts there. So it's one of these things that they just put him in right now. I'm not sure if this is even their permanent 5th. I'm not even sure if they plan on having 7 be their permanent 5th going after. So this could be one of these things that they don't win, you could almost maybe guarantee a different change in some sort of way too, just depending on what direction they actually do want to go. But this kind of seems like just get him in here now. This might have been a long time coming, and just let's see how we fare with this.
Now, another team looking down this bracket has made a couple of changes, little changes, but still, FaZe Clan pulling in JDM. I mean, that was a surprise move. Obviously, JDM's a hella experienced player, but in a different roster and playing, not coaching. So NBK, I mean, FaZe Clan, is this a big buff to them having JDM leading from the back lines?
I mean, I think it really depends on how long he's been working with him, because
Sure.
a lot of the teams in Valorant, I think, are lacking just principles and a more tactical approach, and like a lot of micro situations that are happening during a game. And controlling the tempo, the pace, and that kind of stuff. And so those are things that are not being fixed from one day to another, where you just come in and you have a magic solution and then everything works out. It's something that takes a bit longer. So I don't really know for how long he's been playing and practicing with him. But having a guy that has experience like he has will definitely benefit them. But now it's obviously a whole different skill set, being a coach and being a player. So I don't know him personally enough to know how he's going to be doing it. And coaches don't necessarily match teams all the time. Like, it has to be a good fit. So it's a real question mark. It can be very good, can be very bad. I mean, I guess it can't be very bad. but I mean, it can definitely bring a lot of things and like smooth some things up in a game that are going to be making a big difference in the longer term in games. So I think it's not a bad thing, but it's just a question mark on how efficient it's going to be to help them be better.
Yeah, and I mean, any like red flag that would potentially be there is like, has JDM like been around Valorant a lot? Like, does he play the game? What's the kind of depth of knowledge that he has of the game? But I think in reality, kind of what you're saying is true. Like, if they may not even need him for that, you know, like FaZe has their own style. They have their own kind of way of playing. You know, those sneak plays, Babybay, just like the way that he does his thing. It's like, if they just utilize him for potentially what they need, which may be just talking about some principles, talking about, you know, how to like retake properly and expand on your communication, things like that, I think that, you know, it could definitely benefit them. Now, if they start like taking his like strategic input into the game, I think that would be a whole different ball game. But I think that, you know, they're probably just going to utilize him for what they need. And I think that what they need is kind of that, like when they make those little micro mistakes within the game, someone needs to tell them that, hey, like that was probably not the move to make there, or you didn't communicate well enough, things like that. And I think that he could probably, you know, knock that out.
I think one of the interesting things for me then is the fact that they have kept Trippy on as an assistant coach, right? Yeah. So he'll be working with JDM. So I wonder what the dynamic will be like then between the two of them. If, for example, JDM hasn't got as much contact time with Valorant as you'd hope, I suppose Trippy can always come in and carry that aspect of it. I mean, that's JDM brings Trippy, a unique perspective.
Yeah, Trippy, he plays the game a lot. I mean, he always fires up a stream. I'm pretty sure he's like Radiant in some way. I'm pretty sure there. So like, he's actually a coach that grinds the game a lot. Like, I play, you know, quite a bit myself too. So like, I think that's very important for coaches to have their boots in the ground like that. So I think that, like I said, the benefit of having FaZe is they have, you know, a good manager there. They have a coach there with JDM. They now have an assistant coach there. The Trippy has been there. So they have quite a bit of guys there to kind of help out in any of this.
Now, FaZe Clan's opening game is going to be up against Rise. Now, fRoD, I know you've got a lot of contact time with Rise being within this region. I presume like scrimming and all that sort of stuff. Do you think this is a match that FaZe Clan should be favorites coming into?
I mean, I'm not sure, man. To be honest, like I had Rise going pretty far in like the qualifiers. Like I had them as my dark horse of maybe even qualifying for Berlin. I think that this team is, I have a lot of respect for them. I think that they have like that sort of element that a lot of teams don't. Like they do have brothers on the team. Like Poison Shanks are brothers. Like they have like that element of like camaraderie within the team. You know, I've always looked at Neptune as like a fantastic young talent here in NA. So I think that these are one of these teams, like if they continue to put it together, like they're due for a good run. And I think that, you know, they match up very well against FaZe Clan because Rise has a style of play that I'll say you kind of relate it to maybe like 100 Thieves in some sort of way, that you have like very aggressive early fraggers and you have a lot of experienced players. You have guys like Superman who are just like pillars in the operation of how they play. Like this guy, like he's just a fantastic support player, but also knows when to take over rounds. So I think what a lot of people don't necessarily know about Rise is they're a very well-rounded team. And I think that they have a chance just because of the skill set and the camaraderie and the teamwork that they have. I mean, they're built to win a tournament, not just upset a team, in my opinion.
Well, let me phrase it this way then. Are there any clear-cut matches in the quarterfinals, or are we looking at tight competition the whole way down?
Yeah, I mean, I would think so. I mean, all the games look pretty good. I mean, the thing with NA is I feel like it could be almost any given Sunday, depending on how a team is playing. Some of these guys rely so much on firepower and certain playmaking ability, and it's like that could be, if someone's hot, I mean, someone could easily take over. And some of these teams, like they're going that route of getting the firepower, trying to frag out. So I mean, yeah, like you're gonna start seeing a lot of this happen more and more. Like that's why I think in the EU scene too, like they're embodying that more. They're starting to play a lot more in your face, like seeing how Gambit plays. Like it's, you want to take those fights in this game, like even the little peekers advantage. So, you know, I could see that happening for sure.
I'm going to look at that bottom game there. The last game that's going to take place, V1 versus Cloud9 Blue. Now, it's an interesting matchup for a number of reasons, but I'm going to start with this. The fact that V1 have now got their full roster back together. They're finally able to play with all their players. There's no more, you know, no players banned for saying mean things. And then when you look at the other side, it's a player called Vanity on Cloud9 Blue. Now, I seem to remember Vanity being on V1. That's kind of an interesting dynamic. NBK, from at least your experience playing competitively for quite a while, going up against an ex-teammate in a matchup like this of this importance, how does that shape V1's perspective on the game?
Well, I think a lot of it is going to be able, and how I see it is, the more you know them and your old team, the more you're able to get under the skin. I think that's to me the number one thing that is going to be
Sure.
important, because game style is going to change, approach is going to change. Like, you're going to know some things like how they approach maybe some certain rounds and stuff like that. But especially on the LAN environment, you know how to get them triggered. You know how to really, get into the head and not let
Yeah.
them play their A game. And to me, that's the aspect I like the most in those sort of matchups. And to me, that's the biggest way you can take advantage of that in a game. Because I don't know if Vanity is leading or not for Cloud9 at this point. But you won't necessarily be able to shape your whole approach and give that vision to your in-game leader if you're not it, to like change it on how to approach playing against a team, because you would change your own identity and your in-game leader won't be comfortable. So I think it's not the right approach to do. But if you can get them out of their comfort zone, and for you to stay in your comfort zone and win some small rounds because of some of small things that to me that's the best way you can do it in order to perform as good as possible in that matchup. But yeah, that would be my approach. And a lot of players don't necessarily think of those things a bit outside of the game, a bit more mental aspects. But I think that's the best way you can take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think we almost saw that at Masters as well, fRoD. You remember seeing those, especially I think the Japanese teams, when they were losing and they had their opponents standing up, shouting at them. You could almost see them start to go into their shell a little bit. Like they were really feeling it. It amplifies emotions, doesn't it? Because winning on LAN feels amazing, but losing on LAN sort of swings the other way as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is like when you're like, let's say you're going up against a team like Gambit. Let's say you're beating them 10-0. They're ice cold. Like, you're not going to get that kind of reaction from them too, right? So I think it could go both ways. Like, maybe C9, they might be a little bit more vocal because they have that sort of camaraderie. But if it doesn't phase V1 at all, that might almost be like a different side of it too, because they might not even care, because that's kind of the other side that you've seen. Like some of these EMEA teams, or even like Vision Strikers, or we saw New Turn, like they were almost accepting the struggle that they were in and trying to overcome it with that positivity, rather than kind of just like getting angry and like trying to hone in. Like accepting that sort of environment is almost kind of using that positive attitude to kind of overcome that. So I think that it can go a long way,
Well, I want to move on then to talking about this bracket overall. We're going to do two things here. Let's go with just because it's such a tight bracket from what we're hearing, we're going to go with a prediction on who's going to take it, but I'll allow you to give me a dark horse as well. So you got to double down on this one. And if everyone goes for the same team, I might scream. So let's start with you, NBK. Who do you see taking it, and who's your dark horse?
I mean, yeah, I think 100 Thieves are in a good position, because again, they have really that basis. It's pretty much like G2, where they have that basis of like having a group that have played a LAN together, that have a lot of experience, that know how to bounce back from losses, and they bring in a fresh blood that is going to change ever so slightly the way they're going to approach the games, and how they're going to play it. So I think they're in a very good spot, and they like to also bring new things to the table in terms of composition and how they approach the game. So I like their chances to be winning it. And then as a dark horse, yeah, I think FaZe is in a good place. Yeah, they have a lot of talent in the roster across the board, and it's also the kind of team that they can brute force their way through the tournament. Like if they're all really on form, and now with JDM behind them, that can also bring a bit that experience of the things that he has been through in his past teams. You can really help, especially on LAN, to keep a group focused and composed for every single game, and not just to go crazy first game and then to slow down through the tournament. But if they can ramp up game after game, like gain 10% of their level each game they play at, they play one after the other, that's the kind of things that JDM can bring to a team. So I I hope that you guys are not going to pick those two exactly as well. But those would be my two teams.
No. I mean, so on my side, I'm gonna have to go. Like my pick, I think to win this is gonna be Rise. I think that and I also it kind of bodes well too because they go against FaZe. I mean, if Rise loses that game, I think then FaZe might be able to carry through because kind of the history with FaZe is getting sent to the lower bracket and then making just a magical run through that. If they can overcome that sort of issue that they've had and not go to the lower bracket to kind of wake up in a tournament and just kind of dominate everyone through, they might take the whole thing. But I believe Rise is going to win that game, and I think that they might be that team that just takes that whole tournament through. Now, when it comes to dark horses though, and kind of my team that I think that might be able to kind of shake some heads there, I think V1 might be able to do a little bit of damage. And I guess a little bit of bias because the player that they were able to get was Odorous, who was the in-game leader of my team that kind of, have a good relationship with, and we, had some success in this game together with. I think that he brings a lot to a team. And I also think stylistically, like the roles and the agents that he play benefits V1 more towards what they're maybe doing right now. So I'm actually curious to see how that goes and plays out on a LAN perspective. And then with that grudge match, I think the bottom side of the bracket is on fire. Like obviously, like I'd love to see the top side, great storylines there. I also think 100 Thieves is going to probably do damage, and they always like have a chance to win something. But that bottom side of the bracket has like a lot of that firepower and stylistic side of NA that I think a lot of people are going to be happy to at least just watching and experiencing that.
Well, I'm going to have to swing in for 100 Thieves as my favorites to win it, just because top 4 last event making changes is going to make me a little bit uncomfortable with that pick, but I can't doubt them that they've got the vision in mind. But as a dark horse, I'm going to go with my boys over on X at BCJ. I believe you can take it across the line this time. And you know what? If they beat 100 Thieves, they're already in the upper final. They're in a pretty good spot. Obviously, they got to make it past Luminosity first, but I have a good feeling about these guys. I'm willing to roll the dice this time around.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't mention them, but I'm also very curious about them. Like I've seen good things in the past when I see them play, even though it was not that much, obviously. I don't know. I think they have something that is quite good in what they're offering. So it's between, I don't know. I like them. I was about to ask you guys about them because you might know more about them, but I'm quite curious about them and what they can do.
Yeah, I mean, they're a team that's very similar to FaZe, like just complete firepower. The difference between them is that they recruited Def, who is an experienced player and an in-game leader. I think that element has what's put Xset over the edge and has made them a consistent competitor like that. So, and he hasn't been there for all that long. I know that he's completely changed like the aspect of it and how they look, and I think that they're doing fantastic. So they almost kind of got that like G2 feeling that they're on that consistent rise. So I'm hoping to continue to see that out of them, and I'm sure they'll do well.
Yeah, I'm sure they will as well because, look, it's an NA team, and so, of course, they had to get better by bringing in some EMEA. Let's jump on that because that's EMEA and NA nicely packaged up for us, cleaned up. We know who our favorites are to make it out. We know our dark horses. And in NA, we know that it's going to be hella exciting. A lot of really close matches. I want to talk a little bit about your perspective, NBK, on VALORANT overall before we close things out. Talking about the EMEA landscape as it is, how do you feel like VALORANT is sort of compared to Counter-Strike in terms of tactical depth? Do you think we have the skill even though we haven't, poached all of the tier 1 players like we see in NA?
Wow, that includes a lot of things to be talking about for one answer. Okay, I'll try to make some sense of it. So I think just the approach of VALORANT and how you have to play tactically is very different from Counter-Strike, and that's where it is very important to have. If players switch, for example, from Counter-Strike to VALORANT, they have to be very open-minded in changing the whole approach and how they see the game, because I do believe that you have to give a lot more focus on how agents can be making an impact and a difference in the game, more than how you approach a map globally in terms of like using smokes and plays and taking the space. You can keep some of those principles, but I think you have some fundamentals that are very different because just of the way the agents are working and the teams are working with that. So the focus is, instead of being in a global focus and you have to control what smoke you throw at the right time to block a whole area and then you can play the numbers game as the odds, you have to be much more confident into micro plays, like two players, like two agents working together, making a special play, how to counter a push, how to do all those things, that has much more focus than the whole global game plan. And then when it comes to the scenes, I think there is talent everywhere. It's always been the case that NA has been extremely talented individually with the players that they have, and I think in Valorant it is more valuable. But I still think also that in Europe you're going to have more players that transition coming from Counter-Strike with that experience that are going to be able to bring a lot of those small principles and more, giving an identity to a team on winning the bomb planet situation, playing the numbers games, controlling the pace of a game, all that kind of stuff. And that's where I see Europe having a bit more of the edge in that sense. So maybe the best thing is to unite both and to have a team that lives in the middle of the ocean with some NA players, some European players, and then you mix that. But yeah, like for those parts, I think also to just add to all of that as a global thing is that it's still a very new game, and a lot of agents are coming up. You can see a lot of different playstyles, even though you have some teams that are leading the pack in terms of meta. When you look at regions, for example, more in Korea or like Southeast Asia in general, I think they always bring a lot of good ideas to the game, and like some of the micro things you can take and adapt to the way you're playing and the way you're approaching some maps. And so that's what I love about Valorant, that how global it is and how much you can create in the game. As simple as that. Like you can really do a lot of things that are going to be out of the ordinary, and that is going to really define who you are as a team. And I think that's the most important part for the next, let's say, 2 years. Just like League was up until Gambit came and changed the whole meta of the game. Like the game was quite wide open, and Gambit came with like a very specific approach to the game, and then it just shifted the whole meta, and then everyone played like that for like the next 2 years, and then it like was the basis of like the more modern type of game style. And I think in Valorant it can definitely be something that's similar. Maybe it's not going to take as long, but I think it's something that could happen for sure.
Yeah, I wonder if it'll be accelerated because, yeah, we've already got Counter-Strike, right? We've already seen all of these developments. I think you just look at the first 2 years, we're not even 2 years, but year and a half of Valorant competition. Compare that to the first 5 years of Counter-Strike, right? Like, I think a lot of the mistakes that were made back then, or a lot of the growing problems don't necessarily exist to the same extent here in Valorant, already kind of learning from our past in that way.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm also interested in then is yourself and Kenny S are playing in this Twitch event, and I'm just wondering, is that maybe something we can hope to see more of in the future at Twitch events or VCT?
Well, I mean, when I got benched and Kenny got benched, we were definitely talking to make something happen, not in Valorant, but more in Counter-Strike. But then options became very limited. And in Valorant, we didn't really talk that much because he just hasn't made the transition yet, from what I know. I don't know if he's going to make it, and I'm not counting on him for anything like this, truthfully. Like, I'm just making my own path. I have my own plan.
Okay.
I have my own ideas that I'm not going to go too much in depth in. But, I know what I want, and I know the direction, I know the timeline, all of that stuff. And I don't really count on anybody, just like I've never really done that in Counter-Strike. Like, my plan is to find the right team to evolve and win, period. And I have a good experience doing that, so I can try to, smell the right place and then see where we can win. As simple as that. And so yeah, like I think it's a great event that is going to happen for charity the next few days. Yeah, we might play some ranked and stream together, but it's gonna be as much as that. There's nothing more on the competition side that is saying that we're gonna be playing together or anything like that.
Sure. Okay. So don't read into it too much, is what you're saying. But
no.
I'm sure.
I mean, definitely not. Yeah.
Reddit still will. I mean, there's no stopping it. but look, I'm really excited to see the MB coming to life here in Valorant. It's a pleasure to see. Thank you so much for joining us here today, and thank you, fRoD, as well. That's the end of the show. We've tied everything up nicely, talked about LCQ, EMEA, NA, and a little sprinkle of info in between. It's been a pleasure. Make sure to tune in the future.